So, a brand new episode of the Cassian Andor series is here, and as always, there are many Easter eggs, callbacks, references, foreshadowings, parallels, etc, etc. So, let's go through them all for Cassian Andor episode 4. Now, just to give this video a little bit of storyline, I am gonna roughly break down what happens, like, plot-wise between each Easter egg, but we don't need a full recap or breakdown of the episode because we all watched it, we all know what happened, so let's just go into the details that you might not have noticed. The episode begins right where we left off with Luthen and Cassian on their ship escaping FIVERR. They jump into hyperspace to get to the planet Aldhani. Luthen continues to try and convince Cassian to join the fight against the Empire. Cassian doesn't really want to do so, he wants to fend for himself, which is much like a friend he's going to meet in the future at the start of the movie that they're in, and that is Jyn Erso. And it's also kind of similar to Han Solo as well, but he was a bit more adamant that he was only going to fight for himself than Cassian and Jyn. And speaking of Han, there is a cool detail that somehow involves him later on as well. By later on, I mean this next detail. Cassian mentions how he fought on Mimban when he was 16 years old. Now, to work out which Battle of Mimban he's on about, we have to figure out what year it would be when Cassian is 16. So he's 26 in Rogue One, which is 0 BBY, as BBY stands for Before the Battle of Yavin, which occurs in A New Hope, which occurs right after Rogue One finishes. So the difference between 26 and 16 is 10 years, so it's 10 BBY, the battle that we're on about. And the 10 BBY battle, aka the Campaign of Mimban, is the exact same battle that we see at the start of Solo: A Star Wars Story, that Han Solo himself, Beckett, etc, etc, fight in. So yes, Cassian Andor and Han Solo may have actually met before, especially when you consider what Luthen says next. He says that Cassian wasn't a fighter in this battle, he was a cook, so Cassian could have cooked Han some food. And he says how he only survived, he was only one of the 50 people that survived because he ran away. Cassian also mentions that in this battle they were made to fight each other rather than like an actual enemy, which is very similar to what Pong Krell did in the Clone Wars on Umbara. He made clones fight clones. And the final two things we learn from the very start of this episode is the ship itself is called a Fonda Hallcraft, which has never been seen before, other than of course the last 3 episodes. And Luthen gives Cassian a drink called Medical Nog. We've never really heard of it before. Given that it has medical in its name, I'm going to assume it's to heal Cassian's burn on his shoulder from being shot by a blaster. Cassian eventually agrees to take on the job that Luthen is wanting him to take on, because he's offering 200,000 Imperial credits. But how much actually is that in the real world? Well, according to this guy on Reddit that worked it out by comparing the price of real world items compared to Star Wars items, apparently a credit is 2.1 US dollars, and I always thought that $1 was worth more, but apparently not. We then go to Coruscant, where we're introduced to a couple new characters that are going to appear in later on in this episode and in future episodes, most notably Dedra Meero, who is the blonde lady seen on screen right now. And in this like ISB, Imperial Security Bureau meeting, we get the mention of Ars Dengor and Sly Moore. Now, Ars Dengor was an advisor to Palpatine in the Clone Wars, but you probably won't recognize him. But Sly Moore, or Slee Moore, however you say it, you just might. She was seen on screen in the prequels a couple times. She is an Umbaran. She's maybe Force sensitive, and again, she was basically an advisor to Palpatine, but technically speaking, she was an administrative aide and chief of staff to Palpatine in the Clone Wars. We also get the mention of mining on Arvala 6, and we haven't seen Arvala 6 before, but if we go to Arvala 7, that is seen in The Mandalorian, and it is the planet where we meet Quill. And the final detail mentioned in this segment is that Scarif is named, which is of course the planet seen at the end of Rogue One, but it's specifically named because there's increasing amounts of shipments going there. Now, why is this a detail that I've pointed out? Well, there was some concept art for Scarif in Rogue One that showed the Death Star being like built literally inside the planet. I don't think it's canon that that happened, but this could be calling back to that and referencing that because increased shipments would be going there as they are building a Death Star. Cassian then renames himself to Clem, which I'll speak a bit more on later, as Luthen goes to talk to Vel and leaves Cassian in the ship. But before Luthen leaves, he gives Cassian a down payment of something worth 50,000 credits. This thing is a blue Kyber Crystal, of course, a Jedi lightsaber crystal. And he says, and I quote, "It's a Kuati Signet, Little Kyber, Skystone, the Ancient World, and it celebrates the uprising against the Rakatan invaders." Now, the Kuati are a human race from the planet Kuat, I imagine that's how you pronounce it. And they are most known for their building of ships for the Republic, the Empire, the New Republic, basically everyone. When he says the ancient world, it sounds like when Obi-Wan calls the like pre-Empire time, the prequel era, a more civilized age, which of course could be exactly what Luthen is referring to, as it is a Kyber Crystal that he's holding. And the Rakatan invaders is something very interesting for him to mention. The Rakatan invasion was between 150 and 160 ABY, so well before the Phantom Menace, in which the reborn Rakatan Imperium species come from the unknown regions and basically invade the entire galaxy. They are like Force sensitive-ish. Like, they're no Anakin Skywalker, but they are classed as Force sensitive. And yeah, like I said, they invade the entire galaxy. They start from the northwest, then eventually the entire north, and then they go for the core worlds, including Coruscant, which is where Luthen lives, which may be why this crystal means so much to him. He says that he wants it back from Cassian. Luthen goes to speak with Vel, like I said, and whilst he does so, Cassian thinks about stealing the ship and then goes to do it, but he's stopped because a droid built into the ship like speaks to Cassian, asking if he needs any help or anything like that, basically just telling Cassian, I'm watching you. Now, a droid being built into the ship may be a reference to the Millennium Falcon, as of course in Solo: A Star Wars Story, L3 was shot and damaged, and then her consciousness was actually transferred into the computer system of the Millennium Falcon. So effectively a droid was built into the Millennium Falcon, just like Luthen's ship, just not quite the same. We then see that the Pre-Mors headquarters is taken over by the ISB due to their failure in episode 1, 2, 3, and now the entire Milana system, which the Pre-Mor were in charge of, is now being controlled by the Empire themselves. So people like Khan are out of a job. So he goes to Coruscant to visit his mother, and I think it's quite cool how the protagonist, Cassian Andor, and antagonist, Khan, both share something in common, and it's a close relationship with their mother. But he doesn't get to Coruscant until later, so I'll speak a bit more on that later on in the video. Speaking of Coruscant, Luthen also then goes to Coruscant, and whilst he's arriving, he gets changed from his rebellion attire into his rich Coruscant man attire, showing how he has like his double life, which is interesting because Cassian kind of now has a double life with his new fake identity of being called Clem. Now back to Clem on Aldhani, we see another one of the things in the Cassian Andor series very similar to what we have in the real world, that they just changed slightly to make it a bit weirder, so then it's like Star Wars-fied. For example, from the first 3 episodes, the coffee and the phone booths, now it's sheep with a lot of weird curly horns. Now going back to Khan's arrival on Coruscant, it's announced on the speakers that ships to Hosnian Prime and Plexus Euphornis Major, never heard of it, are departing. And Hosnian Prime is the main planet of the Hosnian system, which is the system that Starkiller Base like blows up in The Force Awakens. Going back to Cassian again, he gets like a med stim like seen in Jedi Fallen Order from one of Luthen's crew, because obviously he has a hole in his arm from the blaster. And then Mon Mothma arrives at Luthen's like antique shop on Coruscant as his assistant Clea reports on like some little details, including the fact that she has a new driver, showing that she's in on Luthen's like double life. There are many artifacts in Luthen's shop, so I'm going to run through them all because some of them are really cool actually. And starting with the one that Luthen names himself, it is an Utapawan monk cudgel. Now I've never heard of a cudgel, but I have heard of an Utapawan. Obviously they are the species native to Utapau, which is where Obi-Wan fights General Grievous in Revenge of the Sith. And the Grand Inquisitor is an example of a Pawan. We also see in the background some armor that looks very similar to Starkiller's armor from the Force Unleashed games. And no, this doesn't mean Starkiller's canon, it's just a very cool Easter egg. Possibly my favorite, but there are some more really good ones, including what looks very similar to the breathing mask that Plo Koon had to wear. Yes, that's not how his face actually looked. The like dark grey black thing was a breathing mask. Here is a photo of him without the mask. Now you're glad that he wears it, but this probably isn't his, as we know what happened to him. His mask probably got disintegrated, but another member of his species. We also then see some stone glyphs / murals, but more specifically those of the Mortis gods. Now you can't see the gods, so let me tell you how I know that they are murals of the Mortis gods from the Clone Wars. In Star Wars Rebels Season 4, we see like stone glyphs that look very similar to these. which Ezra Bridger used to enter the world between worlds. Now notice on the ones in Luthen's antique shop you see like hands, whether it be an open hand, a closed fist, or whatever, but in Rebel Season 4 we see that those hands are the hands of the father, the son, and the daughter. Luthen then takes Mon Mothma to the back room to discuss some like real rebel business after Clea distracts the driver, and in the back room we see some artifacts that maybe Luthen doesn't want on display, including what looks like holocrons from both the Jedi and Sith. Now we learn that Mon Mothma is the one who is funding Luthen's like rebel business, that's why he can afford to pay Cassian 200,000 credits, and she wants to bring someone else into the circle. Now I think this someone else is Mon Mothma's husband. She obviously trusts this person, she'd probably trust her husband, and when Mon Mothma goes back to her house, her husband knows about the present having to get returned to Luthen's shop, and the reason why she's getting it on loan, as Luthen says, and then will be returning it, is so that she has an excuse to go and speak to Luthen without it seeming suspicious. So if her husband isn't suspicious of her bringing a present back just to return it, he probably knows exactly what she's doing there. Speaking of her husband, he's organised a dinner that night with the governor of Hana and many others that Mon Mothma had a disagreement in the Senate with literally the day before, in which these people had some shipping lanes closed down, which will mean that many people are going to starve. Mon Mothma seems very self-aware of her like wealth compared to these people, as she sarcastically says how they can discuss how people are going to starve when they're on their third course. Now they go over their plan via a 3D model rather than a hologram that we see in Fallen Order, Book of Boba Fett for example, because they simply can't afford a hologram, and Cassian scoffs at the plan as they don't believe that they have any hope, which is the exact opposite of how Cassian acts at the end of Rogue One in the exact same situation. The Battle of Scarif had very, very low odds of actually going well, but Cassian was all for it and believed that they could win. And he is then tasked with staying up all night to play on the iPad practicing Aldani phrases on Duolingo. Now, this episode was obviously just to set up like a bigger, more action-packed episode 5, but I still thought it was good. It wasn't as good as episode 1, 2, or 3, but I did still like it, and I do think episode 5 will be a definite step up, as they've allowed like an entire episode to set it up. So I am very, very excited for next week, and if you are as well, make sure you subscribe and turn notifications on so you don't miss any of the Andor videos that I'm releasing over the course of the series. Of course, I'd also like it if you left a like on this video if you liked it. Let me know what your favourite Easter egg was in the comments. Mine was, of course, the Starkiller armor. And check out this video right here, because it's what YouTube thinks you will enjoy most. Of course, thank you for watching, and goodbye.